My name is Skip Rutherford. I'm Dean of the Clinton School, and welcome to another in a series of public programs coordinated by Nikolai DePippa. This is our final public program for the school year, and we have about 100 programs a year that are free and open to the public, and we try to do a wide variety of speakers and topics and issues, and how appropriate that we close the year with this panel on medical marijuana. So it is a pleasure for me to introduce Nikolai, who will moderate the panel. He directs this program series. He does the strategic planning for the school, a graduate of Hendrix, a pretty good soccer player, and recently a new dad. Please welcome Nikolai DePippa.
Oh, we got it.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Thank you, Dean, for that. I won't do a large introduction. We're just going to get to kind of chatting with our panelists, and then hopefully have questions from all of you. So when we get to that, raise your hand. We'll get a microphone to you so that we can capture that. But first, I kind of want to start with how we got here. And so, David, I think you probably versed in how we got here, and kind of go through what happened last year. And yeah.
All right. I probably won't need this because I'm loud anyhow to begin with. You know, I'm used to like courtrooms in the counties of Arkansas. So how we got here, I'll tell you how I got here. In 2012, I was circulating a ethics measure with that evolved out of the regnant populist movement here in Little Rock. We didn't get on the ballot, but during the course of that campaign, I met the people who were doing the medical marijuana amendment in 2012, actually an act in 2012. I knew nothing about marijuana at the time. I grew up in Jackson County, Newport, Arkansas, Church of Christ. I mean, if we drink beer and whiskey if we did something bad. So I had no idea what was going on, but I met these people, and they asked me to help them. So I was really scared at first. My dad's an elder in the Church of Christ. I'm like, what am I going to do with marijuana? I was really scared about it. But they were very passionate about what they were wanting to do. So I agreed to help them. And so as we began circulating the petitions throughout the counties, I met people who always told me some sort of story about how they or some family member used marijuana to relieve one of their ailments. And I became convinced that it was the right thing to do. And so we got it on the ballot. We survived a legal challenge, and we began the campaign. And during 2012, during the campaign, me and Jerry Cox from the Family Council, who was a big opponent, we would go to all these little churches across the state of Arkansas, and we would have forums, kind of like we're having here, to discuss marijuana. And, you know, we would go in there and we would talk, and I would give my spiel about how I thought it was compassionate, the right thing to do, and he would give his spiel about how I was going to burn in hell. But afterwards, what we would do, you know, like you do in every churches in Arkansas, after you have your little fellowship, you go back to the fellowship hall, and you have cookies and Kool-Aid and tea and coffee, and we would go back there, and people would come up to me and tell me, thank you so much for doing this. This is the right thing to do. We have somebody that in our family that has an ailment that benefits from this, and we're criminals because we go out and buy them to get it to do it. And so despite the fact that we were polling really in the 30s, I figured we were going to get a lot closer to that. And so in 2012, we lost by almost 0.5%. So out of 1.1 million votes, there were only 30,000 people that separated the yays and the nays. And so I became convinced that I was going to do it again. And so I took notes. I learned everything that people said in 2012 that was a legitimate criticism. Everything that I could change, I changed. I watched the other states from 2012 to 2016, and where there were problems or good things that I saw in all those other states as proposals, I added it to ours. Lucky enough, I found some funding to help us. We got it on the ballot, and we won.
Representative House, so you wake up morning after election day and realized you may have to do something with this. And so I wanted you to kind of walk us through from then until present date, how the state has kind of worked to enact this.
Well, about this has been in the paper, so you can take a nap if you've already heard the story or read it. About 2 months before the election, November the 8th, the Speaker of the House, Jeremy Gillum, called me in and said, "Doug, if either one of these amendments pass, you know we're going to have to implement them." And I said, "Yeah, I guess so." And he said, "You're in charge." Now, coming from a military background, and two of my mentors are here, Don and Frankie Sears, both retired colonels, you don't sabotage the mission. Whether you like it or not, whether you agree with it or not, you carry out the assignment. You accomplish your mission. And that's my background. And he said, "I need you to take care of this." So that started about 2 months before the election because we had some inkling that it was polling pretty strong. Sure enough, it passed. And in the meanwhile, I had been giving it a lot of thought. I had given money to campaign against it. I'd spoken at churches. I'd spoken at before the Pharmacists Association, the turncoats. They turned on me. They're all in favor of it now. There's money, right? But anyway, you know, I campaigned against it. We lost. Okay, the people have spoken. You know, it's kind of like fighting a duel. You know, you can't go to court and sue the guy that just shot you because you agreed to the duel on the beginning. Well, we agreed that whatever got the most votes wins, and that's the most important thing as far as government is concerned. So I gave my plan to the Speaker, and the plan was pretty simple, 4 points. Number one, get the product into the hands of the people that believe they need it. Number two, keep it out of the hands of kids. Number three, keep it out of places where it's unsafe, like automobiles and workplaces. And number four, try to keep organized crime out of it. That's our 4 objectives that we were trying to accomplish in implementing the amendment. Now, the legislature has no business enforcing the law. As the old saying goes, we meet, 90 days every 2 years. We ought to meet 2 days every 90 years is the way the old joke runs. And there's some truth to that. We can't pass laws and then just, it's kind of like setting a speed limit out here or erecting stop signs. You pass a law, well, does that mean everybody's going to stop speeding and quit running stop signs? No. You have an enforcement mechanism through the executive branch. So we decided to empower the 3 agencies that would be involved, the Medical Marijuana Commission, MMC, the Department of Health, and the ABCD, Arkansas Beverage Control Division, the enforcement arm. All the other federal agencies, for example, the Department of Labor has the Boiler Inspection Division, and so they'll be inspecting boilers. The state police and the Arkansas Crime Information Center have to do background checks. All of that empowerment legislation needed to be passed, and so that's what we decided to do with the Speaker's approval. Got good bipartisan support. Few people, were against anything that we were going to do. A couple of guys that always voted no voted to allow soldiers to use it and kids to get a hold of it. So go figure, they weren't reading it either. But that's how I got involved, and I'm glad the session's over with. Thank you.
I want to say that I want to thank Representative Colonel House for what he did this last legislative session. Him and I probably are on the opposite sides of the political spectrum, but when this passed, he called me and he told me, and I always remember this, he says, I was against you, David, but the people of Arkansas have spoken, and Representative Gillum has asked me to do this because I'm a colonel and I'm used to following orders even if I don't like them, and I have to commend him for everything that he did and the Republicans did in this session.
Now we'll bring in our out-of-state guests. Both have had extensive experience implementing both medical as well as recreational or adult use, as Dan said. And this is something, Dan, you were talking about earlier when we were kind of driving around, is that this isn't necessarily a partisan issue. And I wasn't going to comment on that until David kind of mentioned. So touch on that, but also some of those definitions. So recreational/adult use, medical, and then some of the stuff that you've done, as President of Americana Brands, the kind of infused or edible was a hot topic in this legislative session.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot. So I'm Dan Anglin. I have been a owner in the cannabis industry for the last 6 years. I'm an old Marine. I am a Shriner, a Mason, a father, a regular person who is also a business owner in the cannabis industry. I have had 37 different licenses in this space in 4 different states. And I've been a partner in retail, I've been a partner in cultivation, and a partner in manufacturing, which includes extractions and processing into different types of products. So we do concentrates now, as well as edibles. We're in both the medical and the recreational marketplace. I have 42 employees currently. I've probably had more than 250 on all the different businesses that we've had. And I'd just like to also throw out a number there. I mean, Colorado has 42,000 people who are employed by cannabis businesses today. That's just 42,000 people with a job working for a licensed cannabis business. And then you've also got all the ancillaries, the things you don't think about, which are the packaging companies and the security companies and the camera companies and on and on and on, insurance, all of these things. I mean, it has a tremendous economic impact. My background prior to getting into cannabis was as a professional lobbyist for the State Chamber of Commerce in healthcare. So I was a business lobbyist. And what I did was I took that experience and formed the Colorado Cannabis Chamber of Commerce, or C4. As an old Marine, I thought C4 was a great way to really kind of explain what we were doing. And what I really wanted to do was create a cohesive voice of the business concerns of cannabis, because we'd already had the concerns about the social side. And this is a very expensive business to get into, as each state implements these medical or adult use. I don't like to call it recreational because that kind of taints it. It's really adult use, 21 and over. And the regulations that are involved are very expensive. They're very exhausting. I mean, I think what I've heard is it's $15,000 just to make your application for cultivation. You know, I mean, that's just the beginning, right? You also have to have bonds. You have to have all these escrows. This takes true business people who are involved in this that understand pro formas, business models, regulations, and compliance. So that's why we formed the Colorado Cannabis Chamber of Commerce. And of course, there's every issue under the sun has come up in Colorado. You mentioned edibles. There's potency levels in the medical side, or in the recreational side that aren't in the medical side. My understanding now is that Arkansas currently has potency limitations. I think what you're going to find is that you're going to probably revisit that simply because you've got patients who are going to need much more than 10 milligrams. An edible is extremely important to people who either live in a townhouse or an apartment and they've got smoking restrictions, or they need to consume and they've got children in the house and they don't want to fill up the house with smoke. I could go on and on and on. You said a lot of things. I can't remember all the different things that I'm supposed to be talking about, but I'm very honored to be here, and I'd love to talk more about concentrates, edibles, and the business of cannabis, because that's where all the legislation is going to go from here.
Eric Williams, lastly, kind of Dan touched on it, but some of the regulatory processes, you've worked in this field as well to help businesses kind of get started and stay in compliance.
Yeah, I also come from a long background in business and politics. I was a political consultant for about 20 years before I got involved in this space about 6 years ago. And one of the things that I've seen that I've been a big part in, and that has been the writing rules and regulations, as well as dealing with how it affects a business in real time, in the real world. Anyone who's in this business knows that this is and will remain for the foreseeable future one of the most highly regulated businesses in the country. This is not something where you want to be fighting with your regulators. You don't want to be fighting with your host community. You don't want to be fighting with your legislature. You want to be working with them. And I do want to take a moment here to reiterate something that's the praise for Representative House. And he had also said to us very early on, We need to do this right. The people have spoken. That gets to the heart of the regulatory structure here. What we found in states across the country is the people speak, and the legislature tells them, well, you're just a little misinformed. You didn't quite understand it. The same people who put them in office, clearly they understood the vote for them, but not the marijuana vote. Here in Arkansas, they've taken a tact with the rules and regulations and the legislation that was necessary to implement it, that really understood that the best way a regulatory structure works is when business and the regulatory agencies are in tune with the end goal. Those end goals are exactly what Representative House just mentioned. That's keeping the bad actors out, that's keeping out of the hands of children, that's making sure that that you have products that are effective and that they're actually getting to the patients who need them. Part of that as well, the patients who need them, we're talking about some folks who are really hurting. Your friends, your neighbors. You know, I've never seen cancer check a voter ID card. This affects everyone across this state. And making sure that the rules and regulations don't make the product that they need extremely expensive or too expensive for them to actually benefit, that is a big part of regulation. And what Dan just mentioned is absolutely true. You can regulate this business to death. You absolutely can. You can put in, we've seen rules change the day that we have completed construction projects. The very next day we have to rip out $200,000 worth of equipment because the regulations changed. So touching generally on regulation as a whole, Arkansas is going to have 5 producers. It's going to have 32 dispensaries. Those folks need to have solid relationships with their individual communities and how they want to regulate on a very local level, as well as the regulators, as well as having constant communication and openness with the legislators who are going to make sure this works not just for the businesses, because the businesses are just the persons who are supplying the patients. So I hope that answers your question.
Yep. David, there's been some changes to a little bit. You okay with kind of where it looks like now?
Oh, absolutely. You know, when I took out to draft this thing to begin with, I knew I couldn't cover everything, and I knew there were going to be some things that needed to be changed. Some things we put in there that may have made it like the tax revenues, where we're going to go, may have, for political reasons, because we thought people would do that. But you know, Representative House and some of the senators kept me informed of all of the bills as they were being filed and discussed, and allowed me to have my comments. And there was really nothing that was passed that affected this matter in a material way, other than to make it better.
Representative, what's the timeline? Where are we on that? When is this up and going?
How about the rigs? Okay. I happen to have brought the emergency regulations. They had to have those in place by May the 8th. That was what, yesterday? Yes. So what they did was each of the 3 commissions that are primarily responsible issued emergency regulations. They're good for 120 days. At the same time, they published their permanent regulations, which will have to be considered by the Legislative Council, which is our interim legislative body that reviews all this stuff. And they will consider that first in a subcommittee on May the 16th, and the full Arkansas Legislative Council will consider them together, the permanent rules, on the 19th. Then the emergency rules, which are exactly the same as the permanent rules, will go away, and the permanent rules are filed with the Secretary of State, and they'll be good until the process begins all over again. Any changes, you can make an emergency change, but things start happening. If there are going to be any permanent changes, they have to be opened up to public comment, just like these were, and allow for comment and objection and lawsuits or whatever else. That this process has gone so smoothly, I am very, very pleased with the work of our civil servants and our board members. They have really poured their heart and soul, and they deserve our thanks and our admiration for what they've done. I have purposely not stuck my nose in their business. They're the ones that have to defend the regulations. They're the ones that's going to get sued if somebody's unhappy. So it's You let the executive branch do their job just as they let us do ours. Thank you.
Dan, what are some lessons learned from mistakes made? Not necessarily, whether it be from kind of your perspective, cultivating, or the other side, kind of the regulatory side.
So medical and adult use continue to be what's called in the legislature harmonized, right? Because what we had a completely different set of medical rules from the adult use rules, recreational. And what ended up happening was that when the adult use passed, they tried to be very restrictive at the beginning. And so you had basically two completely different businesses under one roof if you were both medical and recreational. And what's been happening is they've been taking some of the restrictions from the recreational and applying them to medical, but then they've been trying to make the businesses more efficient. And this is what I mean about the future of legislation, is that at the beginning, they're gonna be as restrictive as possible to keep criminal element out, to make sure that all of the things that Representative House said were his four main concerns are codified in statute and then codified into municipal code. But then they're gonna find that a lot of these things are too expensive for people to continue to actually have a business, because there's still OSHA, there's still unemployment insurance, there's still regular taxes as a business personal property tax, all of these types of things, and then of course the banking problem, and of course just finding people with no criminal record who can work for you. Because in Colorado, you can't have a bad credit history, you can't have a student loan in default, and you can't have any felonies, even drug-related felonies that are cannabis specific. So if you've been busted in the past, you don't get to work in this new wonderful world of legal cannabis, right? So you've got what I believe to be some freedom issues. We are restricted from certain types of advertising that no other business is restricted from, and we continue to talk about our First Amendment rights in the state of Colorado. And so what I see is not necessarily mistakes. What I see is that there was a lot of fear of the unknown and a lot of barriers put in place to just make everybody much more comfortable. But what that did is it made it almost impossible to afford to be in business, no matter how many millions of dollars you had. So now what's happening is we're convincing the legislature, because we're articulate business people who have formed groups like the Chamber of Commerce or the Marijuana Industry Group or the Cannabis Business Alliance, to talk to legislators about what our everyday concerns are. So I think the biggest mistake was everybody rushed to prevent things, regardless of whether or not it was an actual problem or a perceived problem. And they created all of these regulations in the hopes of preventing just one person from having an issue, whatever it may be, whether it's edibles or whether it's cultivation. And now they're having to spend all this time and money to go back and fix it and make it reasonable. But this is the reality, that every state that goes through this process that Arkansas is about to go through, and no matter how many people like myself or Eric come and tell everybody in Arkansas, just do what we've already done because we've already been through it and we know where you're headed, they're still gonna do it. So you've got at least 5 years of trying to figure these kinds of things out before it becomes part of the legislative dichotomy and discussion, where a cannabis business is just like oil and gas, because that's where we're trying to get in Colorado. We got a lot of oil and gas in Colorado, and there's a lot of similarities between us. We actually hire more people than oil and gas does.
Did you have something, David?
Yeah, you know, this makes me really proud of Arkansas, listening to Dan and the problems that they're having in Colorado. You know, one of the things that I did when I was drafting this amendment, I watched Colorado and I watched all these other states that were having problems, and I did my best to try to address those in the actual amendment itself. And then again, the General Assembly And we talk about our civil servant, Joel DePippa over there. He's like the king with the red shoes over there. I watched him sweat during many of the meetings and during the Medical Marijuana Commission as they were asking him questions. You know, not to say that we're not going to have these problems in Arkansas, but guys, our industry in Arkansas is not going to have near the problems that you guys have because, you know, y'all blazed the trail in front of us, and we learned from that, and I think that the members of the General Assembly have learned from that. The 5 members of the Medical Marijuana Commission, 2 of them are physicians, 1 of them is a pharmacist. They are absolutely patient-based, and their goal, and I've heard them say it so many times, is we're going to do whatever we can to get this in the hands of the people that need it, and we don't have all of those impediments in our regulations that you guys had. So I'm really proud of our state.
I would just like to add to what David's saying. As long as everybody keeps in mind on the medical side that this is about patients who need this product for their medicinal, whatever kind of treatment they're looking for, as long as they keep that in mind, these problems that I'm talking about won't come true, because what the legislature was really concerned about was the business of it and who was going to be involved in the business of it, how were they going to do it, all of these other things. So as long as that focus, and congratulations to Mr. Couch here, as long as the focus for the legislature continues to be the patient when we're talking about medical use, then you'll have a lot of success.
I want to echo something that David said at the very beginning of this thing. As I've been out and about, people come up to me in church. Now, don't tell my preacher, and don't tell my boss, and don't tell, but you know, my sister. I've heard it hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. This is medicinal product. If you really want to know, and I know there are a lot of thousands of people watching on this online, get on the internet and look in Israel and see the research they're doing out there. Those folks are not slackers. They're exporting this product internationally now, and derivatives from this product. He allows me to use his name. Billy Howard is one of my favorite people. He grows legal hemp over in Millington, Tennessee. Billy grows for the University of Tennessee. We've got 40 acres of legal hemp. By the way, we did pass a legal hemp bill. That stuff will grow in a sandbar. I guarantee you it will.
Bring it here. Bring it here.
Yeah, legal. Yeah, it will restore land. It sucks heavy metals out of the soil, lots of other good things. But Billy grows 40 acres of legal hemp, and the things that he's telling me, omega-8s and 9s, dissolving cholesterol in your blood, dissolving plaque in your veins and arteries. Now, why can't we look at that? Why can't we study that? You know, you go to the American New England Journal of Medicine, you're not going to find a study. Well, we gave 10 people a cannabis product, and other people we gave, 10 placebos. You're not going to find that study ever published in the United States. Somebody's going to prison. So I'm glad to see that this research activity, and that's what we want to do. The people that need it, we want them to have it. Recreational, a whole nother subject, but we're not there yet.
Eric, you mentioned this earlier as well, talking about studies. Can't turn on the TV or hear any commentary today without talking about opioid addiction and kind of some of the new stats that are coming out of states with medical cannabis and opioid use.
Right, and I think that's addressing a fear that comes out, where folks think that, if you're going to be legalizing medical cannabis, that just means that we're just going to have hopheads roll around the streets and kids and in your school and the sky's going to fall. Any kind of fear-based rhetoric. What we've seen across the country is that's absolutely not the case. We have seen across the country where we have medical cannabis, we see teen use go down. But specifically and let me just stop on the teen use for just a moment here. What we also see in medical cannabis states is parents talking to their kids. I know that seems like a really novel subject, but parents are talking to their kids openly and honestly about cannabis. And that's where I think you're seeing the drop in the teen use. But specifically on opioids, clearly this is the scourge of our nation right now. We have 5% of the world's population, and we use 75% of the world's prescription drugs. opioid addiction is across this country. And what we've seen in the medical cannabis states is we see an immediate drop in the opioid problem. Now, how do we measure that drop? Well, first and foremost, the easiest way, and this is the hard data, is we see the prescriptions actually drop. And we're seeing about an 8% drop in prescriptions, and then that starts to correlate on the addiction side of things. So we've actually seen that using cannabis on a medical side can actually get people off of a lot of opioids. I could tell you 1,000 different individual stories that I've heard, and so many folks will tell me I was on opioids for years. And I wasn't in pain, but I wasn't me. I wasn't a mom, I wasn't a worker, I couldn't do this. And it was cannabis that got me off the opioids. Thousands of stories I've literally heard, and I'm sure everyone at this panel has heard many, many stories as well. It is, I'm not gonna tell you that there's studies out there that link a direct cure. It's anecdotal at this point to look at it, but it's clear evidence. And I think that it can be a big part of stopping the opioid crisis here. Instead of getting on a pill, which, by the way, never steps down, you only step up. That's why we have opioids now with thousands of milligrams as opposed to 50 a few years ago. You can only go up. You can only get more addicted. You can only have it build up more in your system. That's not the way with cannabis. This is a solution to the opioid epidemic.
And what I want to say is that the research and the studies have shown that in states that have medical marijuana, the number of opiate deaths is reduced by 25%. I mean, this is just hard facts. We had 360 people die in the state of Arkansas last year. So if we've done nothing more with our medical marijuana program when it's up and running, we've saved probably 100 lives a year, period.
But marijuana is a Schedule I drug, right? It's still have that pesky federal state issue.
There is hypocrisy in the federal government. Again, I know that's another shocking thing out there, but there is a little bit of hypocrisy. And the first biggest piece of hypocrisy is that the federal government has owned a patent on the medical use of marijuana for a number of years now. And so that, just be clear, Schedule I means that there is zero, not 0.1, zero medicinal benefit. Well, I think that no one needs to look very far to know that that's just not the case. And in fact, you can look right in the patent office and see the federal government knows that that's not the case. And we've actually had since, I believe, I'm spacing the year, I think it was 1974. Since 1974, the federal government has been supplying medicinal marijuana to a number of patients around the country. So that very basis, we're looking at a zero number, and the federal government is also telling you, on the other hand, yes, there is something. So there is the need to reschedule or deschedule, and if you don't mind, I'll take just a moment on the rescheduling versus descheduling. Moving this to Schedule II shuts down an awful lot of what's going around this country. Moving it to Schedule II basically says cannabis is now big pharma. That's how it goes through. It also takes about 7 years to go through all of the clinical trials that would get it done. And then we still have other issues at that point, which means that none of the pharmaceutical companies are licensed on a state level to actually use cannabis. There's a whole bunch that comes with that. Rescheduling to Schedule II is not what we want to see happen. Going to Schedule III or descheduling would be the best way to see this happen and to see the continued innovation, patient-focused and not just the hard dollar-focused, keeping we're looking at patients, not customers for the long term, and keeping it out of Big Pharma's hands is the best thing that, one of the most important things that I like to do in my station in the cannabis industry is keeping it out of the hands of Big Pharma.
And since we're from Arlen, Arkansas here, and Ole Miss is our big rival, all of the cannabis that's grown by the federal government is grown at Oxford, and they are paid $120 to $150 million a year to grow all the marijuana. University of Mississippi gets that money, and
Hotty toddy.
they have hotty toddy. Are you?
No.
No. Oh no. But anyhow, and he's true. What you really don't know is that since at least the early 90s, the federal government had a program, and there are patients today that are still enrolled in that program that drive up to Oxford every month, and get their 10 of medical marijuana because they registered as patients there. When they refused to reschedule marijuana, what the federal government did is they allowed other entities to research and grow their own programs and federal grants. So if Representative House wants UAMS to do that, then the federal government will fund a program at UAMS to grow marijuana so that you can actually have research and testing now. Since we're in the Southeast Conference, LSU got the first big grant to do that now. So our two big rivals in football are ahead of us on marijuana as well now.
You asked about still legal at the federal government. I mean, honestly, I've been doing this for 6 years, so what, right? That's what the 10th Amendment to the Constitution is about, is that what the federal government is not charged with creating law for, it's left to the states. And the states that have decriminalized, created CBD only, created medical, or created full, complete use is 40 out of 50 states. At this point, it's a 70% approval rating for some form of access to cannabis. I think it's 63% approval rating across the country for complete access to cannabis. So I sleep at night, and I've been doing this a long time. Right?
Yeah, I sleep very well. And, you know, we're talking about the federal government in the Schedule 1. I think it's also worth noting what happens on the federal level. And we have not seen, since Colorado opened its doors and many states followed, we have not seen one single federal action against a doctor, a patient, a cultivator, a manufacturer, a state agency that's implementing, or a dispensary that is operating in full compliance of its state laws. Not a single federal action. We also just saw.
Hold on. We'll get you, Mike. I'm opening up right after this comment.
Sure.
I'll get you.
I can address it, Michigan very, very easily as well on that. A state licensed system. There's not been one that's operating underneath a state licensed system, which is different from what Michigan's system is at this point. We also have seen that the federal government, again, just went through and defunded any federal action on the federal level through the Department of Justice, again, on the same level. If they are operating, going against anyone who is a legally licensed medical marijuana participant, again, whether that be a doctor who's recommending, a state agency employee who is implementing, or someone who's actually working within the industry.
Okay. Open it up for questions. Hold on a second. 1 second. I got you first.
I'm Keith Olson. I'm from Flint, Michigan. I run CRAP, Criminalized Racketeering Against Patients. And I have a real big problem with what's happening here in Arkansas. I believe that the legislature has went rogue against the wishes of the Drug Policy Alliance, the MPP, the Department of Justice, and the federal government. I don't see the federal government allowing the good old boys setting up a system of 5 mega grows of 10 million plants laden with mold, mites, and all different PGRs. It can't be done. It's never been done. You can research the Nevada model, anybody would like to. These guys have touched on the testing of the patient's medicine several times. And the fact of the matter is, medical grade marijuana doesn't come from a 40-acre warehouse. It don't work like that. Medical marijuana comes from Israel through GW Pharmaceuticals and other synthetic sativexes and stuff like that. I don't see the federal government considering this plan falling into their future of medical marijuana whatsoever. I believe this is a rogue plan. The original bill didn't want smokable forms. I believe Schedule 2 is going to be the waxes and synthetics. Schedule 1 is going to be your Monsanto GMO strains. They're testable. They can test them roadside in a police car. Pull it out, put their bud in the machine. If it turns green, it's Monsanto. If it turns red, it's Keith's, and you go to prison. I don't see this system alleviating any of the prison problems, and I don't see this helping the community at all. 25 years ago, one of my best friends was killed by the police in Brinkley, Arkansas. He was transporting marijuana down the road, an interstate traveler. Stopped. The Arkansas Criminal Code ripped him out of the car by his ankles. He died in a jail cell. The current sheriff of Brinkley, Arkansas area cut him down. There's a YouTube video of him online going 107 miles an hour with the good old boys pulling him over and just letting him drive. I think this system here is driven by a good old boy network, and I really don't think this is going to fly under the federal regulations. And if you all have anything to say about that, have a good night. Crap, criminalized racketeering against patients.
Was there a question?
Yeah, I can comment on this right now. I can tell you right now, I feel sorry for your friend, and I sympathize with you about that. But I will tell you that I drafted this amendment, and I set this amendment up. You can have up to 8 cultivation facilities. You can have up to 40 dispensaries dispersed throughout this state. It has an open and transparent system. There's no good old boy network. We've got 5 people on the Medical Marijuana Commission that have come through this application process that will be independently scored and graded, and the top 5 are going to get it. And the General Assembly and the Marijuana Commission and the ABC and the Department of Health are regulating this thing to death. I will tell you, with the number of patients that we're going to have in the state of Arkansas, with 8 cultivation facilities, with 40 dispensaries, we will meet the needs of the patients. We set up this system where it'll be competitive for the dispensaries, competitive for the cultivation facilities. The dispensaries can grow some of their own product, and so it's going to get to the patients at a good price and a fair price, and it is not the good old boy network. I can promise you that, because I set it up and I wrote it myself.
Thank you. I didn't hear a question either, but I would have agreed with you 100% before November the 8th, and the arguments that you said were made. The people of Arkansas voted against that position, and they voted it in. And they're good people. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It's my turn now. But the point is that the people voted it in, and they heard that argument. I made it too, and it didn't fly. So that's the end of the question. That's been decided by a majority of the voters. Thank you.
Can you explain how it's worked in other states? Once the dispensary gets up and going, how do they communicate with the grower? How does that system work once we're finally going with a dispensary in the growing community?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have a couple of thousand businesses in Colorado, and yet we all somehow really know each other very well. In this number of businesses, this is a very small community that we're talking about, and they're all going to be communicating with one another, meaning any of the processors that don't have a cultivation license will be constantly calling the cultivator to find out when their harvests are and how much they're going to be charging per pound. Same thing with all the dispensaries. So now, once you have more than that in the business community, then you get brokers, right? So we have brokers that are involved. Even though I have 2 cultivations and 2 manufacturings, I get emails every day. I've probably gotten 3 while I've been sitting here from brokers who want to offer me whatever prices they may have from their facilities. So the communication is basically just a small world of common business interests. Let's colleagues. Everybody who has a license kind of knows each other, because we always see each other at the licensing office, right, or the tax office, paying our tax bill. So this is going to be a small community. You're talking less than 100 businesses. It's going to be very easy for them to communicate with one another.
And the way it's set up in the amendment is there are 8 cultivation facilities, and the dispensaries are required to purchase from the 8 cultivation facilities, and the dispensaries are going to be 40 of them, and they can grow marijuana themselves, up to 50 plants, and they can trade among themselves outside of the cultivation facility. So if you look at a dispensary and you look at the number of plants they can grow and the estimated number of patients that each dispensary will have, they're going to be able to produce about 25% of the needs of their self in-house to do that. So the way we've set this system up is really competitive among themselves and encourages innovation and research, because there's a system that's set up where the patient gets a card, And when that patient goes to a card, he goes to the dispensary and he swipes his card, because you only get 2 ounces every 14 days. And that registers with a database with the Department of Health, so they can track that thing. So it's a tightly controlled, regulated system.
Yeah, I'd like to add on to that as well. Not just the communication. I'm very confident in the communication that will happen because it's a necessity for businesses to effectively operate. What I'm also encouraged by is making sure that we have, in this small community that's being set up in Arkansas, that the patients can also communicate effectively what their needs are. You know, if we have 5 cultivators who come in and each of them puts out a number of products, not just flowers, but other delivery mechanism products out there, you're making a best guess based on the patient need out there. But the patients are going to become more educated. They're about the products that are available out there. They're also going to become more educated about how the products affect them on a daily basis or on a monthly basis or whenever they're having a flare-up or whatever it may be. So making sure that you have constant communication with your patients is as equally necessary as having communication amongst the businesses to make sure that the businesses are meeting the needs of the patients for the products and delivery mechanisms that they need. That's okay.
Nope. Bob, Gene? Yep.
Yes, sir. Robert Reed with Talk Cannabis and Politics. I know a couple of you up there, and the gentleman that come from out of state, congratulations. A couple things that were pointed out. The 10th Amendment of the Constitution. This amendment has got, in my opinion, one very large elephant in the room that nobody's talking about. And it's called Section 20. And it says, quote, no implied repeal. This amendment acknowledges that marijuana use, possession, and distribution for any purpose remains illegal under federal law. Now, Representative House just said they passed a hemp bill. They passed a Hemp Study Act that requires the federal permit. Cannabis itself has 2 definitions. The state of Arkansas's got one, the federal government's got another one. Well, strike me. All right. My question is, the state of Arkansas did not exercise its 10th Amendment rights to protect the growers and the distribution centers and the pharmacies with Section 20. How are we going to protect our patients and the supply when the regulations do not include, as I read this morning, the requirement for the federal permit under Title 21?
Robert, I understand your legal argument. We've talked about that many times in the past. I had to put in the amendment that it was illegal under federal law because it would have never passed muster with the Arkansas Attorney General, and it would not have ever passed muster with the Arkansas Supreme Court. So I understand your argument that it's a state's rights and that even under federal law that cannabis may not even be illegal, or Arkansas has to exercise its state's rights. But I just think that from a legal perspective, that's some court decision will have to be made. But as far as the political process and the implementation of this program goes, it's a non-issue.
Hold on, no rebuttals. We're going to keep moving on. We need to get through these questions a little bit quicker, so no more statements. We're going to keep moving right here. One second. Wait for the microphone. Wait for the microphone, so everyone can hear you, even if it's trying to break down.
Oh, the mic.
There we go.
Thank you. How do we as citizens get cannabis descheduled?
Call your congressman and call your senators. Tom Cotton, John
Bob, say
Bozeman,
that.
French Hill.
Bob, up here. It has been introduced. It has been introduced multiple times. It just hasn't gotten anywhere in Congress.
Yes, hello. I just have a quick question kind of regarding, you brought up, Dan, the banking issue that's going on. Representative House, do you have any plans for Arkansas to help support these businesses because of the fact that I do know currently it is a very cash-heavy business that they're having to deal with in many of these states because of banking regulations. And does Arkansas have a plan to protect these businesses themselves, these clinics here?
Let me answer your first question first. What do I plan to do about it? Okay, I addressed a group of bankers over at the Excelsior out in West Little Rock, out there on Chenal, probably in March. There were about 400 bankers there, and when I started talking about, what are we going to do about this cash-heavy business, I got a whole hum attitude. Then when I told them that first year sales, by some projections, $40 million in cash, you ought to have seen the eyes light up. I have heard stories about people paying as much as $6,000 a month for a checking account in order to deposit their cash. I've heard stories about armored cars. That's cheap, And I've heard about armored cars backing up to the state Department of Finance and Administration in order to pay their taxes and unloading cash. I have talked to our congressmen and senators, and there have been bills introduced in Congress about the banking. Now, banks have found a way in these states, in the other states. I'm not at liberty to share some ideas that were shared with me because I treat all the communications like that confidentially. So I can talk to a lot of people, and I'm not going to share their stories unless they do. But what was announced at this banking meeting were there at least 2 South Arkansas banks that are chartered by the state that are very much interested in getting into this business. There is, it's called FinCEN. It's an acronym. It's basically the Treasury, the enforcement arm of the Treasury. They actually have an enforcement mechanism. If you bring in $50,000 worth of cash and you're Walmart, they don't do anything. That's okay. That's cool. But if you walk in and you're ABC Growing Company, they have to file something called a suspicious activity report, SARs. There are 3 different levels of SARs. One is, hey, we know this business, everything's fine, they're licensed, they're operating the way they're supposed to, they're legal under state law, we have no reservations, it's not a crime. Number 2 is, well, something don't feel quite right about this much money all of a sudden. We'll go ahead and file the suspicious activity report, but we're going to look into it a little deeper and make sure everything's okay. The 3rd level is these guys are a bunch of crooks, we're closing their accounts and giving them their money back, y'all needed to know about it. As long as you're getting that first SAR, you're okay. If I remember my figures correctly, the first year that the federal government said, here's the way we're going to do it, I think there were like 1,800 a year SARs filed. Now I think there are 24,000 a month that are filed in the United States. So
Sure.
The banks do find a way to get to the money.
Look, according to FinCEN, every bank has the ability to process cannabis, legal cannabis, businesses' money. The issue, as Representative House has talked about, is the SAR. So I pay about $24,000 a month for my bank account. And what that is that's an $18,000 fee for me to have that account. And then that other $6,000 is once I hit a certain number of cash that they've counted, they charge me for every bill. But we don't have those kind of transactions really anymore because, so I'm a wholesaler. To go back to your original question, I'm a wholesaler, so I don't sell to the public. I sell to dispensaries. That's my client. So my sales force knows every single purchasing manager of all 980 different stores across the state. And all of our transactions are with primarily businesses that have the same bank account as mine. So sometimes we can do wire transfers into each other's accounts. But it's primarily checks for us as a wholesaler, right? I mean, if I get cash, it's starting to become more rare. But the issue is that I have a complete full audit of my entire account and all of my licenses and all of my employees every quarter. So I basically have a bookkeeper who isn't just a typical bookkeeper. If any of you are business owners, she has to basically be a forensic accountant every 3 months because she has to prove, literally, I bought coffee in a state that I don't do business in, like this one. So I've used my debit card while I'm here for my bank account, right? I'm gonna have to explain every single transaction, why I bought a quesadilla at lunch at the Marriott, right? And what I was doing there. This is what the banking relationship really is. And most banks don't want to hire for all of that kind of effort that they have to go through. It's not that they can't, it's that it's an entire division. But this bank that I do business with, it's a farm bank. Guess what they're using all of that money for? They are using all of my money and all of my colleagues' money to loan to farmers to buy equipment. And I'm happy, it gives me chills to give that community that money, because those are people down in southeastern Colorado that wouldn't be able to get those loans because that money wouldn't be there if I didn't have that account.
I just like, yes, he's right behind you there.
Eric,
I'd like
could you-
to add on to the banking question as well. And the reason that this is a concern for folks maybe in the audience is because there's, again, the notion that there could be criminality behind it. The idea of persons having tons of cash on them at any time, that's going to invite the criminal element. Well, so there are issues with not having full access to all banking. I've had 5 bank accounts shut down, personal bank accounts shut down. Dan, you're probably in the double digits at least.
My 15-year-old had his bank account shut down because he was my son.
Yeah. So first of all, on the cash side, we still have a lot of cash at dispensaries. But let's be clear, cash businesses have operated in America since its inception. It still happens. There's protocols, there's ways that you go through handling that cash. And then you have to, of course, digitize it. We certainly still don't have access to commercial loans. Those are our problems. Those are the business side of problems. When it comes to patients, they still have access to ATMs right in the bank, or right in the dispensaries that they can take their money out and pay for it there. We have banking solutions in terms of having the cash picked up safely directly at our facilities. Going in Denver, they are deposited directly into the Federal Reserve. We could talk all day about banking. Yeah, we could talk all day about banking. But here's the thing that we need to know is, in the end, anyone who's actually concerned about criminal activity within the cannabis industry wants us, or should want us, to have full banking. Because only when it's all digitized, only when you have a clear record of every transaction that happened, can you actually find criminal elements a lot easier. If you're forcing people to deal only in cash, that allows more opportunities for the less savory characters out there.
I'm Glenn Schwartz with Arkansas Normal. I have 2 questions for the gentleman on the ends who have been in the business. I already asked my doctor, and he already said, well, I don't want to be the first one to prescribe. So are the doctors going to come around and actually give out scripts for this? And my second question is, how would, when you legalize, doesn't that kind of negate the necessity of a medical program?
Those are both really great questions. So first, to your point, what happens is that it's a very small handful of brave doctors who are unconvinced that by giving you your prescription that they'll lose their license to practice, because at the end of the day, they have a privileged occupational license just like anybody else in the state who receives a license to practice whatever it is. But then what happens is a year later, then you'll see a report in the news that said one doctor's got 40,000 patients, and he seems like he's a criminal element. Well, it's because your doctor won't do it. And the reason why your doctor's concerned about it is because, at least in Colorado, I don't know where we're at in Arkansas, we didn't give the guidance to the medical board to not punish or create punitive damages for physicians who prescribe. So this is something that's extremely important that has nothing to do with the business and everything to do with the patient and the physicians that are out there. Your second question, please just remind me again, because it was awesome.
Once it becomes recreational, why you don't need the medical side?
Oh yeah, I want to visit that. Go ahead, Eric.
Sure, I'll take that, and then I'll leave Representative House to sort of double back on the other one. Yeah, I guess you could say that it does negate it once you have it, but then again, we still have the federal question on there. So right now, what we are not sure of is where the federal government is going to come down on the adult use of cannabis. We don't know. They've hinted that they may actually. I'm sorry, what was that? Well, no, I wouldn't say keep it in reserve in any way, shape, or form. I can tell you from my own personal belief, the way that I got involved with this was absolutely for the patients and the patients first. I know that you're with Normal. I was the executive director of Normal in my own state, and the biggest battle that I had to fight at the time was with all of my own membership saying, if it's not full legalization, then it's nothing and we're not standing with you. And I said, well, I'm sorry, I can't do that. I need to stand with the person who can't stand and is sitting in a wheelchair. I need to stand for the persons who absolutely have a medical need right now. In the end, I think Dan has brought it up many times before, no one wants to be on a list. They don't like being on a list. And I'm going to steal your lines there, Dan. And not having the medical side where you have a medical registry, you have people have to register, and instead going in and you've got adult use and they can go in and use their ID and they're not on a list of having bought a federally illegal substance. We're going to see a lot more people who will leave the medical side, not bother with a card, and go into just the adult use. We've seen that very, very clearly in the state of Colorado. And Representative, you want to take the...
All right. Ours is a constitutional amendment, and so we wrote in the constitutional amendment protections for the physicians. So
Well, that's good.
the medical licensing board cannot touch them for any involvement that they have in a. I saw your other
Buy
product.
this guy a beer.
and also during in the legislative session, the physicians were kind of uneasy about writing certifications or recommendations, and the language in the amendment said that you had to have a qualifying condition. They had to certify that it, in their judgment, it produced a medical benefit. They didn't want to do that. So in Arkansas now, all the physician has to do is certify that you have one of these conditions. You can take that letter to the Department of Health and get your card.
Okay, it's a very good system. The negation of adult use on medical is marginal, and I'll tell you why. What happens is it's about 2%. If pain is allowed in a state that creates medical programs, it's about 2% of the whole population that goes out and gets a medical card. So at one time, we have 6 million people in the state of Colorado. At one time, we had between 245 and 275,000 medical patients prior to adult use. Now we're just about at 100,000. And what you're seeing is a decline, but that decline is people who just decided not to go back and see their doctor because there's more stores that are adult use than there are medical. But that 100,000 count plus of medical card patients, even with adult use, those are people who are likely parents or they need higher potencies in medical, because in Colorado, we have no potency restriction in medical, and there is a potency restriction in recreational. So if you have cancer, if you have epilepsy, if you have AIDS, if you have something that creates a need for higher potencies, you're going to keep your medical card because you'd have to buy 20 bottles of my gummies versus 1 bottle of my gummies to get that medical dose of potency. So it's not a negation, and I think what people think is that medical is some kind of gate towards adult use. But the truth is medical is its own separate entity, and any state that mixes it up like Washington is making a mistake, because medical patients should be treated like patients and not customers in a store, and that's why you should have the 2 verticals in the future. If Arkansas ever decides to go with adult use, you continue to keep your medical program separate from your adult use program. I mean, there's just a level of respect, there's a level of privacy, there's a level of just the entire atmosphere and experience of a medical transaction versus a recreational transaction. And well, the taxes, I mean, that's what the municipalities want.
Yeah. There is one other factor that kept coming up in your question, and that is the fact, I think everybody in here knows this, but you can step right outside that door and buy, quote, medical grade, it's not really medical grade, for $250 an ounce. And I think most of you in here got some idea about that. It might cost $300. If he doesn't have any and he has to go ask his buddy for an ounce, then it's going to cost you another $50 for $300. $250 to $300 for quote, medical grade. Now, it's not medical grade. It may be laced with heroin, PCP, angel dust, Roundup. All right, some of these people in here know what I'm talking about, Roundup or Paraquat or something like that. What we want to deliver in competition with that market that's fully functioning right outside that door is a clean, healthy, mite-free, fungus-free, mold-free, insecticide, pesticide-free product that is competitive with that market right outside there. That's what we're trying to do.
And, yeah. I know.
I've got 3 quick ones. For the cultivating dispensaries, do they have to be 1,500 or 3,000 feet from a church, a school, or a daycare? 1,500. For just for the cultivating, and is the fee the same for the cultivating and non-cultivating dispensary?
They eliminated the distinction. I think, Joel, didn't they eliminate the distinction? It's $7,500 for a dispensary. They at one point in time they talked about if you cultivate it, it'd be less, but so they just eliminated that. So it's $7,500. If you get it, you get half. You keep the fee. You get half of it back if you don't.
Okay. Now here's my question, and this might be for the out-of-staters. So I've been going to continuing legal education about the pot stuff and listening to it online, and there are out-of-staters that are trying to convince people in Arkansas that we can't do it without them, that we can't write our applications without them, that only they can be persuasive enough to get our 5 people to believe us. What do y'all think?
I think that the people of the state of Arkansas, and I put in the amendment that it has to be owned 60% by the people of Arkansas because I wanted this to be for Arkansans, by Arkansans, but I wanted to have a little bit so they could have some investment. But no, we have the ability to do that in our own state.
What'd you say, Dave?
I have an answer for you. So what they're really trying to tell you, because I've been licensed 38 times,
Yeah.
is that we know a lot about what those answers need to be
Right.
on your plans, what you need to talk about with your architectural engineer, the kind of facility that you truly need to have, right? Well, I don't think any of these folks are saying that folks in Arkansas don't know how to get a license. I think what they're saying, and again, this is capitalist America, right? This is what we're all about in America. So if I've got the knowledge, maybe I don't want to grow cannabis anymore. I'd like to be your consultant for a fee. So that's really all they're saying is, I've done it. I've been there. I wrote this thing. I got licensed in 4 different states. Maybe I can help you. So I wouldn't look at it so much as a threat, and I'm not in that business, by the way, but I mean, I think there's value to it, but you have to, like any other consultant or attorney or lobbyist or what, make sure you hire well.
Well, how would you know?
If they've gotten a license. So
Do I call the business, your better business?
show your license. I'll show you my licenses in Nevada and Washington, Colorado, right? Like.
I have found, I've looked at it here a couple of times. If y'all don't know about this, I'd recommend it to you because I think the subscription's free. The Marijuana Business Magazine, incredible amount of information about the subject. I have found that the folks that are both local and coming in that have been very open, very honest, they're like doctors. Doctors don't practice medicine for the money, but if you don't pay them, they can't practice money. All the folks that are getting into the medical side are interested in helping patients. But if you don't make any money, you can't help patients and all that. This is one time you were certainly more articulate than I ever have been. We used to say, we don't care how y'all do it up north. Well, this is one of those times where we have to kind of go to some folks that got some experience with this sort of thing. And they have been a world of information, openly sharing all information. I respect their confidential information when people have talked to me. I don't want to share their personal information, but they have been an incredible source. And only if they give me permission to use their name, like Billy Howard in Millington, whom I've just fallen in love with. You know, I don't drop any names. So.
All right, this is
Sure.
in the very
I can
front,
answer that real
very
quick
front,
if you want
very
to.
front, right here. He's had his hand up. I'm sorry. Yes, last question.
Thank
And
you.
Run me off.
My name is Corey Hunt. I'm the co-founder of an organization called Illegally Healed. We've been traveling the world for 5 years telling patient stories, and I've seen a lot of different states legalize medical marijuana. I've been to Costa Rica twice. My team's been to Israel. We've been to Australia. And I've got to say, David, you've done a really good job with issue 6. Representative House, good job implementing it. My question is to you, Representative House. Traveling the world, I've seen different states legalize this and this medicine help a lot of kids. Eric and Dan can probably tell you about what they had to do in Colorado for kids to have access to this in schools. They had to implement Jack's Law because they did not think of anything like this, that kids may be benefiting from this. And if a kid's on a medical cannabis regimen and they're not having seizures, they should be able to go to school. I know the session's done this year, but do you have any plans in the future to allow kids to have access to medical marijuana in school?
The amendment and what we've had, kids can get a hold of it, not the smokable. We'd rather not go there. But they do have access to it now. Now, Representative Mark Lowry introduced a bill to satisfy the schools, I won't say pacify, but satisfy them that if a child is under the influence of the drug, they don't have any business out there on a basketball court or football field. We got that. If they're this sick, they're not going to be out on the basketball court or the football field either, period. So, yes, but they treat a child, we ask them just to treat a child that is getting legalized cannabis products for a particular illness to consider them the same as if they were on any other prescription medicine that their doctor prescribed for them. Yes.
The amendment itself provides that children can have access to medical cannabis at schools.
Administration is a little bit.
Not the school nurse.
We don't have enough school nurses. We don't have enough nurses in this state to go to all the schools. So it's probably pushing it a little far to say, quote, the school nurse will administer. We're not ready to go there. We don't have the people. We don't have the training. We don't have the acceptance. Parent wants to come and administer medicines to their children. That's the parent's business. But even today, school nurses are reluctant to give an aspirin or Tylenol or anything like that. So we're not there yet.
Yeah, we set up a system where the parents are actually the designated caregiver for their children.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what he was talking about. So this is Jack, and Jack's Law allows a parent in Colorado to administer cannabis, and Jack died a week after that law passed. Many of us knew him, and it's very important to get this right, because Jack would have to go to the hospital if he didn't get his cannabis. And this was just an attempt by conservative school district superintendents to prevent cannabis administration to children. And what they were actually doing was harming these children who needed this cannabis. There's a number of kids out there. You can find them on the internet. All you have to do is type in children, epilepsy, cannabis, any of those keywords, and you'll find people like Jack. You'll find Nova Lee. Yeah, you'll find 1,000 families that are doing the same thing. We used to have refugees in Colorado, probably many from Arkansas. Who would have to move. Most of them were from New Jersey, and let's not talk about that fat guy. But you know what we're really talking about is you have a progressive approach to medical cannabis, and this is a very important point. These are patients who need access to it, and they also want access to their education. So if they're in need of cannabis medicine being distributed, at the very least allow the parent to come and give it to them. But at the same time, if they can do it themselves, they should be able to do it themselves. If they got to go to the nurse's station, get their cannabis out of whatever the lockbox or whatever system they've created in Arkansas, that needs to be an option too, because these kids die.
Well, I know that there's lots more questions. Please come up afterwards. Do want everyone to thank our panelists for spending time with us. Robert, thank you.